Hello, I'm Nancy Love of App State's Department of Government and Justice Studies. Welcome to The Academics. I'm joined each week by Michael Wade of the History Department, Paul Gates of the Department of Communication, and Lee Dunstan of App State's Walker College of Business. We begin this week with the presidential campaign and Donald Trump, who has been attracting lots of attention for his comment that John McCain is, quote, not a war hero, unquote. Or more precisely, that McCain would not have been a war hero if he had not been captured. Trump wants winners, and America, it seems, wants heroes. What's going on with this? Mike, can you get us started?
Yeah, first of all, heroes and heroisms. The word hero is, since the Gulf War certainly, a much trivialized and overused word. Heroism refers to either a person or an action which is above and beyond the call of ordinary duty. As I say, you could look it up. What it has come to mean, with constant references to various categories of public servants and even some civilians simply doing what would ordinarily be expected. They're suddenly heroes. And the descriptor hero has now become the adult equivalent of every T-ball kid getting a trophy for conspicuous achievement at season's end. Much ado about nothing, and certainly not central to a campaign for president.
I think the thing that really caused people to do a kind of pullback on the comment that Trump made is the idea that he's always making a comment that is calculated to make you flinch. It is probably fair to say that, at least in my view, that in our society, John McCain, in light of all that he endured in prison during the Vietnam War, and in light of some of the things that decisions he made, which is that he would not accept special treatment which was offered to him, that he probably falls within the category in the context of hero, or certainly brave, and certainly determined. And it's clear that he was badly injured, badly hurt, and he carries those scars for the rest of his life. But what is so hilarious about Trump is that he somehow manages to trivialize everything associated with our political discourse the moment he opens his mouth. That is not to say that I think he necessarily shouldn't be taken seriously as somebody who might stay toward the top of the Republican pack. But it is to say that no matter where he is during this campaign season, he is trivializing our politics horribly.
He's not without company.
He's not without company, I agree, but he's the king at the moment, as he would love that mantle.
Admittedly.
I can only conclude that what he's after is just the limelight all the time. The attack on the hero thing, I've always just thought, who could possibly conclude that that's a good point to make? Who's he attracting? Who's he impressing with that particular approach? I can't imagine anybody is going to say, oh, he doesn't like heroes, or he's not a real hero, so I'll vote for him.
Well, he did pivot to policy, though, right? I mean, he didn't apologize to McCain, but he followed up by saying that McCain had done nothing for vets. Can we expect him to do these kinds of pivots to policy, having first attracted the attention with an outrageous claim?
My guess, this is pure guess now, we're all speculating, I think, but my guess is we're going to be very surprised to see him pivot to some substantive policy as soon as this debate, because everybody expects him to continue to be this annoying clown. And I suspect that he's going to pivot to actually talk about something substantive in the first debate. in an effort to once again be the talk of the town after the debate concludes. I think he's certainly got the mental ability to do so, and I think he probably will.
But I wonder at the same time, if he does begin to a serious discussion of policy, is that going to bring on board the moderates who he would be then seeking, or will that crowd have been put off so much by his first half antics, that they just can't overcome that and they'll just dismiss him?
You know, I'm bad at crystal balls, but here goes. I'm remembering that in the last presidential campaign, where there were a dozen, I suppose, Republican candidates, that Fred Thompson, ex-actor, ex-senator, ex-Watergate hearings assistant counsel, joined the fray about midway or early midway, and immediately shot to the front ranks. Fred Thompson can now be seen on late night television hawking reverse mortgages to older Americans. It wouldn't surprise me at all to see Trump tank very suddenly. I'm not saying that will happen, but it wouldn't surprise me.
To complicate the picture a bit, we saw another example of a hero this week, the black police officer who helped a KKK member overcome by the heat at the protest over the removal of the Confederate flag in Columbia, South Carolina. The image was powerful. What does it mean? The officer was praised for his professionalism, and is that how you see it?
Well, he just wasn't any police officer. He was the director of the Department of Public Safety. So you'd have to kind of think he's the top cop. If anybody should be professional, it certainly should have been him. But the fact remains, I mean, he handled himself exactly like we would expect a public servant to do.
And therefore is not a hero in that sense of the word. Admirable, absolutely. What I admire is the man's leadership, his example, and most of all, his compassion. But heroic, there we go again.
I agree completely, Mike, and it's so interesting that I tried to, at least in my mind when I saw it, it recalled in a less dramatic way what happened when the families of the murdered said almost immediately, we forgive this terrible man who murdered their relatives in church. And so it's interesting what can happen when people either consciously or unconsciously employ Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. nonviolence and compassion in an effort to promote whatever they are doing. It seems to be the most effective.
And certainly in an atmosphere where that's not the way it usually goes.
Well,
it really does stand out in this particular situation. Well, both these situations, the murders and the flag controversy.
that brings me to our second topic for today, which is we also saw the scene captured on video when Sandra Bland, who later died in her jail cell, was stopped in Waller County, Texas for failing to signal a lane change. How are we to understand that by comparison? Were race and gender factors? Should they have been? Will this escalate further? What do you think about the actions of that police officer and the entire situation? And Paul?
Well, the way the video that I first saw opened with her already on the ground, with the officer, kneeling on her or holding her down, and that immediately, the first reaction to that, I think, is that's bad behavior on the part of the officer. Then, what later, I think it was yesterday, that I saw for the first time from the beginning of the stop, and that's much more troubling. I mean, it doesn't seem at all that there was anything that warranted that kind of response on his part. I kind of wondered about that. The first video, I thought, well, yes, it was only a lane change, but what happened at the beginning of the stop there? But now I think that the mystery is dispelled, and it was not a warranted action on the part of the officer. Certainly not from the beginning of the stop, and when he starts reaching in to pull her out of the car for not getting out. That's where things, I think, have went bad fast.
I watched, I don't even know how it happened. I was early morning computer surfing, and I somehow got onto the whole dash cam episode that lasted more than 50 minutes. And so it begins, astonishingly, it begins with a previous stop by this same officer, and it shows him giving a motorist, a white motorist, a warning, and being very cordial. Then it shows him making a U-turn and coming immediately behind Sandra's car, and he immediately pulls her over. And because she is slightly irritated, what happens, at least this is my recollection of the events as I saw the dash cam, he was giving her a warning. He was going to give her a warning. He had stopped her for failing to use her signal properly in a lane change, which, by the way, in some states is not a violation. In Florida, it is not a violation to do that. And anyway, so he's leaning into the car, and he's suggesting to her, and he says, "You seem irritated." And she says, "Yeah, I am irritated." And then he says, "Can I ask you to put out that cigarette?" So he makes a request that she put out the cigarette, and she says, "I'm smoking the cigarette in my own car." Then he immediately says, "Get out of the car." He immediately then issues what he says, and what some will say is a lawful command, that she get out of the car. And it is outrageous when you watch the entire thing. It is absolutely outrageous that a citizen who had not used their signal properly is commanded to get out of the car after a request is made to put out a cigarette, and they say, "I'm smoking in my own car." It is outrageous.
That's one of my questions, which is, as citizens, what responsibility do we have to protect our rights to free speech, to not unfair search and seizure, to Miranda rights, and if it isn't safe for black citizens to protect their rights, where are we as a nation?
This is abuse of power from beginning to end. Ordinarily, in my experience, I have had some, they don't want you to get out of your car. If you move to open the door and say, no, stay in your car. The U-turn was executed fairly slowly. Thereafter, he closed on her at great speed for reasons that are, to me, not clear in the video, because what he's ticketing her for, warning or otherwise, is her moving over when she saw him closing on her at speed.
Which she explained to him.
She did.
Yeah.
He then pulls her out of the car bodily and moves her out of sight of the video cam in his cruiser. And I don't think, there's no way that he didn't know he was doing that. And then she's taken to jail. And what about the constitutional requirement for reasonable bail? How does a traffic stop for failure to change lanes wind up with charges of resisting arrest?
What happened is that the charge then, and you can hear if you watch this 50 minutes of insanity, in my opinion, the charge then escalates to resisting arrest and assault on a police officer.
Which is a felony.
Which is a felony.
Which is also sort of standard operating procedure in arrests. If you make any move to assert your rights, you're charged with resisting. If they grab you, as he grabbed her, then you're not only charged with resisting, but assault comes next. But somewhere in here is the judge who set bail, the person who's running this police department. The officer should, at a bare minimum, be fired. And that police department ought to be looked into, much as the one in Ferguson was looked into. And that what goes on in Ferguson and all those little communities around St. Louis is absolutely stunning. They're basically preying on poor people so that they can generate revenues to run their departments. We should all remember that discrimination and mistreatment are contagions. If we sit back as less fortunate citizens are abused, whether by the police, politicians, or the merely venal, we can expect that they'll come looking for new victims when they've exhausted the old ones. And anybody who doubts that ought to look at the decline of the middle class in this country over the last 35 years. With declining resources and status comes diminished respect and increased risk of victimization for growing ranks of underemployed American citizens.
You know, what Nancy said, I think, and I think what you're saying, Mike, is really on the money. And I discuss it with students, and it's really fairly simple. If you don't exercise these rights in our society that we are so fortunate to have guaranteed by our Constitution, that everybody always talks about, but if you don't exercise them rather than just chatter about them, you're going to lose them. And we, in my view, we cannot stand by or sit by and watch this kind of thing happen to this young woman, and now she's dead. Mm-hmm. Absolutely outrageous.
And the autopsy found no evidence of foul play, but this should never have happened to begin with. And you know, I'm reminded of the saying that came out of the Nazi era in Germany from one of the people who stood by. You know, at first it was the Jews, and then it was the homosexuals, and then the gypsies, and the Catholics, and then finally they came for them. So it's not a matter just of caring, which should really be the beginning point, but of self-interest. Mm-hmm. So if you can't care, you ought to at least be looking out for your own interests.
I think we need to move to our third topic at this point, but we can circle back. Immigration is in the news again with Trump's visit to Laredo, Texas, but the issue is much bigger than Donald Trump. And I think that all one needs to remember are the thousands of children who crossed the border illegally and alone last summer, a phenomenon that's repeating itself this summer. We're a nation of immigrants, yet this political issue seems to be beyond our grasp. Why aren't we dealing with the problem successfully? You want to get us started?
Well, because our understanding of the history of immigration has never been in our grasp, as far as I can tell. There's a myth of 19th century immigration, which says always starts that we are a nation of immigrants. We have always accepted people who were tired, poor, hungry, yearning to breathe free, because we are an altruistic and compassionate nation. Tell Native Americans that, or African Americans. Immigration in the 19th century. And by the way, we can blame the French in part for that myth. They, after all, sent us the statue. Immigration in the 19th century, as it is today, was about making money and dominating the North American continent, not about altruism. American steamship and ticket agents in the thousands. 6,000 railroad ticket agents alone were all over the European continent, drumming up business for their companies, their steamship companies and their railroads, and also drumming up potential buyers of Western land, of which the railroads had plenty because the government gave them every other section along the lines of the transcontinentals. So there are all these boosters over there telling exaggerated tales about rich land, limitless opportunity, and easy living to gullible, desperate people trying to escape dispossession, despotism, and the draft.
So let's bring it to today.
Well, it's, what Mike is describing here is that, this resistance to immigration once these desperate people got here is nothing new. In the 19th century, it was Irish need not apply signs in shop windows. And there was the whole experience with the Chinese Exclusion Acts, where they actively discouraged and prohibited immigrants from Asia. And so this surge of nativism comes up periodically. And I think we're in it again. We're suspicious of immigrants of all kinds. And I think that is, we're stuck by that. We're unable to act rationally and reasonably to deal with the kinds of immigration problems that you described, Nancy. And we're just falling back on stereotypes and it's like Trump does periodically about everything. But falling back on stereotypes and not making any progress because of it.
Well, I was struck, a New York Times CBS poll just released this morning said 6 in 10 Americans think race relations in this country are bad. And 4 in 10 think that they are getting worse. I mean, nativism is a part of that.
Yes, it is. And I happen to think that those 4 in 10 may have an accurate view of what's actually happening.
Sadly.
This is going to be out of kilter with what's been said, but I think it follows logically from what I said about the 19th century. We're going to have an awful time dealing with immigration, both in terms of the reality of it and doing something reasonable about it, because the choices are less and less good. We live in a much changed historical circumstance from the 19th century. We're no longer an empty country with untapped resources and virgin land out there that was waiting for people. Our planet is bursting at the seams with runaway population. Its life support systems are collapsing under the weight of human demands. And in this century already, scarcities of potable water, arable land, breathable air, and food are already generating civil unrest, social disorder, and repression worldwide. And the result is going to be tsunamis of desperate refugees trying to escape to what they see as havens in Northern Europe and the Western Hemisphere. And the reality is we cannot, these places cannot handle those tides.
I'm curious about that, Mike. I had thought that with approximately 315 million people, that the United States was actually not terribly densely populated, and that it is loaded with natural resources, that our agricultural system is the most productive in the world, et cetera, and that technology is assisting us to be able to support, assuming that we do it smartly, support dramatically more people.
The current system of agriculture in this country is unsustainable. California is the richest agricultural state in the nation. Its Central Valley is salting up, which is what happens with massive irrigation. Underground aquifers are depleted. The Ogallala Aquifer in the middle of the country they're already having to dig hundreds of feet now to tap water, and it's not being replenished. Statistically, we are not heavily populated, but there are regions of the country that are not well populated at all
We
for
need
good
to
reason.
move to a close. I'm sorry to cut you off. Among the things we didn't take up today, whether we are looking at entertainment or politics with the candidates in the media, and we hope to come back to that next week. That's our program for this week. You can reach us with your questions and comments at watchapptv.com. Thanks.